They seated me beside a divorced woman at the mixer. Then the entire room started watching. The moment I realized the singles mixer was less about romance and more about public ranking, a man near the bar actually applauded when my name was called. Not loudly, just enough. Just enough for the people around him to smirk without admitting they were smirking. My name is Adrian Mercer. I was 38 years old, recently divorced, and standing inside a rooftop wine lounge in downtown Seattle, wearing a charcoal button-up shirt I already regretted buying. The event was called Second Chance Social, which sounded less like dating and more like a support group sponsored by expensive candles. I should clarify something immediately. I did not go there because I believed in mixers. I went because my younger brother had reached the point where concerns started sounding suspiciously like harassment. You work alone, he had told me 3 nights earlier while stealing fries off my plate. You order groceries through apps even though the store is 6 blocks away. Last week you described your mail carrier as emotionally consistent. He is emotionally consistent. Adrian. What? You need to be around actual humans before you become a tasteful ghost. So, Friday night found me inside a room full of attractive strangers, pretending not to evaluate each other like rental properties. There were candles on every table, soft jazz, tiny menus with cocktails named things like Velvet Theory and Midnight Bloom. The kind of place where everyone laughed half a second, too late, because they were checking whether other people approved first. At the entrance, we filled out compatibility cards. Favorite hobbies, relationship goals, travel preferences. The hostess, a polished woman in cream silk with a headset microphone and perfect teeth, explained the process like she was unveiling a new operating system. Tonight isn't about appearances, she said, which was unfortunate because the room immediately disproved her. Men straightened posture when younger women walked past. Women glanced at wedding fingers before eye contact. Everyone pretended chemistry was mysterious, while treating attraction like competitive hiring. I lasted 25 minutes before mentally calculating how rude it would be to fake a migraine. Then the hostess tapped her microphone. For our featured pairing round, she announced brightly, we're going completely instinctual. No preference filters, no age sorting, no profession categories. Just authentic connection. The reaction was immediate, some laughter, some discomfort. One man muttered, this should end terribly, like he was excited about it. Names started getting called. Mine came halfway through. Adrian Mercer, table 12. That was when the applause happened, not because of me, because of who was already sitting there. I noticed the room before I noticed her. That was the strange part. A ripple. The subtle electric shift that happens when people think something awkward is about to occur, and they want front row seats without appearing cruel. Then I looked toward table 12. She sat alone beside the windows overlooking the city. Elegant posture, dark green dress, silver earrings, a glass of untouched red wine. She looked to be somewhere in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, though there was something about her composure that made the number feel irrelevant. Not youthful. Not trying to be youthful. Just entirely comfortable occupying space in a way most people never learn. Her name tag read Clara Whitmore, museum conservator. She looked up as I approached and smiled, not nervously, not apologetically, amused, like she'd already understood exactly what kind of social experiment the room believed it was witnessing. You look like a man reconsidering several life choices, she said. I pulled out the chair across from her, only the recent ones. That earned the smallest curve of her mouth. Good, she replied. The long-term mistakes usually have paperwork attached. I laughed before I could stop myself. A real laugh, not the polite networking version everyone else in the room kept performing. Clara noticed people looking over. Of course she did. Careful, she said softly. You're disrupting the entertainment value. Was there a betting pool? Probably. Humans love assigning odds to discomfort. The timer bell rang. 10 minutes started. The hostess floated past our table, wearing a smile stretched slightly too tight. Enjoy yourselves, she chirped. Clara waited until she walked away. Then she said quietly, that woman absolutely introduced me tonight as mature sophistication. I nearly choked laughing. Please tell me she didn't. Word for word, that's horrifying. It sounded expensive, though. That second laugh pulled more attention toward us. I saw a younger guy at the next table glance over with visible confusion, like he'd expected pity, or awkwardness, or polite endurance. Instead, Clara sat there, looking completely at ease while I forgot to monitor myself. You're not enjoying this event either, she observed. Was it obvious? You keep scanning exits like a man trapped in decorative captivity. I was told social interaction builds character. No, trauma builds character. Social mixers build drinking habits. Another laugh, this one louder. The room heard it. Clara leaned back slightly. Now they're confused, she murmured. About what? About why you're still smiling. I looked around then, really looked, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. the curiosity, the assumptions, the subtle expectation that I was supposed to perform discomfort because the woman across from me wasn't 29 and Instagram polished. A man near the bar whispered something to his friend while looking directly at Clara. His friend smirked, then both looked at me. One lifted his glass slightly like congratulations. Clara saw it too. Her expression barely changed. Only her fingers moved once against the stem of her wine glass. There are moments when a room silently asks you what kind of person you're willing to become publicly. This was one of them. I could have ignored it. Most people do. They mistake avoidance for kindness because confrontation risks social discomfort. Instead, I stood. Clara looked up at me carefully. The room went quieter. I picked up my chair, walked around the table, and sat beside her instead of across from her. Not touching, not flirting theatrically, just removing the distance everyone else expected me to protect. Then I looked toward the men at the bar. Sorry, I said evenly. You looked like you wanted to contribute something. Silence. Actual silence. The kind that lands heavily because everyone suddenly realizes a private cruelty has become visible. The man with the raised glass stared at his drink. His friend looked away. Clara turned toward me slowly. For the first time all evening, something beneath her composure shifted. Not gratitude, surprise. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I know. Then why? I glanced around the room, at the curated smiles, the nervous performances, the strange social hunger people carried when they wanted to feel superior without admitting it. Then I looked back at her. Because they decided you were the joke before you even spoke, I said. And I think that's usually a sign the smartest person in the room arrived first. For 1 second, Clara said nothing. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Not flirtation, recognition. The bell rang again. Nobody near us moved immediately. Clara studied me with calm, unsettling focus. Tell me something, Adrian, she said softly. Are you naturally difficult in shallow rooms, or is tonight a special occasion? I should explain something. I did not move beside Clara because I thought she needed rescuing. That would have been arrogance wearing decent manners. I moved because I was exhausted by rooms where cruelty dressed itself up as preference. Clara seemed to understand that immediately, which somehow made her more dangerous. One decent action can become addictive, she warned lightly. Meaning? Men occasionally mistake basic decency for moral greatness. That landed clean. I appreciated it. You're right, I admitted. Her eyebrow lifted. That was fast. Truth doesn't usually improve through committee review. She looked at me more carefully after that, like she was revising a first impression she'd already considered complete. The hostess reappeared beside our table. Time to rotate, she announced. I looked up. We're good here. Her smile flickered. The structure works best when everyone participates equally. Clara took a sip of wine for the first time all evening. So did Prohibition, she said mildly. I laughed hard enough that nearby tables turned fully toward us. The hostess blinked. Clara added kindly, I'm sorry. That was rude to historical failures. The hostess retreated with professional damage control written all over her posture. I looked at Clara. You're enjoying this now. No, she said. I'm enjoying your confusion about enjoying this now. Fair. We stayed through another round without speaking to anyone else, not dramatically. No declarations. No instant chemistry soundtrack. Just conversation that kept deepening faster than expected. She restored historical artwork for regional museums, paintings, textiles, old photographs damaged by floods or neglect. Most people think restoration means making things look new, she explained. It doesn't. It means preserving the truth without erasing the damage. That sentence stayed with me, probably because it sounded like something bigger pretending to be about paintings. I told her I designed interior spaces for boutique hotels and converted industrial buildings. So you also rescue old things people nearly demolished, she observed. Apparently I have a type. Her smile appeared slowly that time. The dangerous kind. The kind that makes you feel chosen instead of entertained. Eventually, the hostess approached again, this time more carefully. We're beginning our compatibility preference round, she said. Participants should return to their assigned. I think we're leaving, Clara interrupted gently. The hostess looked startled. Already? Clara stood and reached for her coat. I've experienced enough organized vulnerability for one evening. I stood too. The hostess turned toward me. Sir, I'm with her. Something about those 3 words changed the atmosphere around us. Not romantic, more disruptive than that. Like everyone suddenly realized the script they'd written privately for the evening had gone off course. Outside the rooftop lounge, the elevator hallway felt cooler and quieter. The city glowed below the glass walls. Clara walked beside me in silence for several seconds before speaking. You understand people are absolutely inventing narratives about us right now. Probably disappointing ones. No worse. She glanced sideways at me. The interesting ones. That made me laugh. Then she stopped walking. We stood near a long window overlooking wet Seattle streets and blurred headlights below. "Why did you really leave with me?" she asked. There was no flirtation in the question. It sounded precise, important. I considered giving her something polished, something charming. Instead, I said the first honest thing that arrived. "Because you were the first person tonight who made me stop performing." Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not softer, quieter. "That's a dangerous answer," she said. "You use that word a lot. Only when people become difficult to categorize." We ended up walking 3 blocks through light rain to a late-night cafe attached to an independent bookstore. The place smelled like coffee grounds and old paper. Half the tables were occupied by graduate students, pretending not to eavesdrop on each other. Clara removed her coat carefully and sat across from me in a booth near the back. This time, neither of us commented on the distance between the seats. The waitress arrived. Clara ordered tea. I ordered black coffee. She noticed immediately. "Coffee at 11:30? Divorce ruined my relationship with reasonable decisions." That earned another smile. "There it is," she murmured. "What?" "The real reason you looked emotionally uninsured tonight." I leaned back. "That obvious?" "Only to people who've survived something similar." The waitress brought our drinks. Steam curled between us. Rain tapped softly against the bookstore windows. Clara wrapped both hands around her teacup before asking quietly, "How long ago?" 2 years. "Messy." I shook my head. "That's the worst part. It wasn't dramatic. No betrayal, no screaming. We just became polite roommates with shared passwords." Her eyes stayed on me. I continued before I could edit myself. By the end, silence had more structure than the marriage did. That sentence landed somewhere deep between us. Clara looked down briefly. "Yes," she said softly. "That kind is harder to explain to people. You were married too." "Not a question," she smiled faintly. 14 years. And he discovered younger women found his photography lectures spiritually compelling. I stared. She lifted one shoulder. "That was the charitable version. I suspect the honest version would get us removed from the bookstore." "Correct." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Not empty silence, thinking silence. The kind adults rarely experience with strangers anymore because everyone rushes to prove compatibility instead of allowing recognition. Then Clara's phone lit up. She glanced down. Her expression shifted. I didn't ask. After a second, she turned the screen slightly toward me. A text message from someone named Elise. "Please tell me you didn't leave with the younger architect. People are already talking." Clara exhaled once through her nose. "Efficient," she murmured. "Friends? Protective ones." That sounds exhausting. It can be. Another message arrived immediately. "You know how people are." That one bothered me more. Not because it was cruel. Because it was familiar. The quiet way people excuse judgment like weather. "You know how people are." As though that somehow removes responsibility. Clara locked her phone. "I should warn you," she said calmly. "A woman my age leaving a mixer with a younger man creates an astonishing amount of accidental sociology. Good thing I'm terrible at sociology." "No," she said. "You're observant. That's different." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Maybe because she'd noticed something about me I'd stopped noticing myself. The bookstore cafe gradually emptied around us. A student stacked chairs near the front. Someone dropped silverware in the kitchen. Outside, rain intensified against the windows. Clara stirred her tea slowly. Then she asked, "Can I tell you something slightly unpleasant?" "Absolutely. When they paired us tonight, I almost felt embarrassed for you." I blinked. She held my gaze. "Not because of me," she clarified. "Because I recognized the room immediately. I knew exactly what some of those people would assume about you sitting across from me. And now," her mouth curved faintly, "now I think they're less interesting than I originally estimated. That shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. But loneliness changes the weight of certain sentences, especially when they come from someone who sees clearly." My phone buzzed. My brother. "Well? Did you survive corporate romance prison?" Another message followed instantly. "Wait." Someone posted a photo. "Why are you sitting beside a gorgeous older woman like you're guarding diplomatic secrets?" I stared at the screen. Clara noticed. "Ah," she said quietly. "There it is." I turned the phone toward her. The picture showed the exact moment I'd moved my chair beside her. Her profile visible beneath the lounge lights. Me halfway seated. The men near the bar blurred behind us. Caption: "When the surprise pairing gets unexpectedly intense." Clara studied the photo for several seconds. No visible embarrassment, just fatigue. "That was fast," I muttered. "Everything is fast now," she replied. "Especially other people's conclusions." I hated how calm she sounded saying that. Not because calm was wrong, because it sounded practiced. Like she'd spent years developing emotional armor for rooms exactly like the mixer. "Does it bother you?" I asked. She considered carefully. "The photo? No. Then what? How quickly people become spectators instead of witnesses." That line sat between us. Sharp, beautiful, painfully true. My phone buzzed again. brother. Okay, but seriously, you look alive in that picture. I smiled despite myself. Clara noticed immediately. Supportive sibling? Aggressively. Useful quality. He's intrusive. Those overlap. The cafe owner announced closing time 15 minutes later. We stood reluctantly. Outside, the rain had softened into mist. Streetlights reflected gold across wet pavement. We walked slowly beneath awnings while late-night traffic hissed past. At one corner, Clara stopped. I should probably go home before this becomes symbolic. Too late. We already discussed emotional architecture over tea. That made her laugh softly. Then she looked at me in a way that suddenly removed all casualness from the evening. Adrian, she said carefully, you understand this could become complicated very quickly. Most worthwhile things do. That's a suspiciously hopeful sentence for a divorced man. I'm experimenting with growth. For a second, she looked younger. Not physically, emotionally. Like something guarded inside her had briefly forgotten to stay guarded. Then she nodded toward the street. My museum studio is nearby. I looked at her. Are you inviting me? I'm evaluating my judgment. And, currently unstable, we walked another block in silence. Her studio occupied the upper floor of an old brick building attached to a small restoration archive. Inside, the space smelled faintly of wood polish, old canvas, and rain-damp coats. Soft lamplight illuminated long work tables covered with brushes, magnifying glasses, restoration tools, and unfinished frames. It felt less like a workplace and more like a sanctuary for damaged things. Clara switched on another lamp. The room glowed warmer. This is where I hide from development executives who think history should become luxury apartments, she explained. I looked around slowly. There were half-restored paintings along one wall. Photographs clipped carefully beneath protective glass. A violin case resting atop a cabinet. And near the far window, a large unfinished oil painting mounted upright beneath careful lighting. A woman seated alone in a train station, coat folded beside her, hands clasped loosely, not sad, not waiting, simply still. I walked closer. This one's different, I said. How? Everyone would assume she's lonely, but she doesn't look lonely. She looks like she finally stopped apologizing for being alone. Clara stared at me, really stared. Then something in her expression shifted. That's exactly why I bought it, she said quietly. The room became very silent after that, not uncomfortable, charged. Clara moved closer beside me, near enough that I could smell rainwater and tea and something floral beneath her perfume. Tell me something honest, she said softly. I looked at her. Okay, if no one at that mixer had reacted tonight, no comments, no assumptions, no audience watching, would you still have moved beside me? I answered immediately. Yes. That answer changed something. I saw it happen. Not dramatic. Just the slow collapse of a defensive structure she had probably spent years maintaining. Before either of us could speak again, someone knocked sharply downstairs. Clara stiffened. Another knock. Then footsteps climbing the stairwell. She closed her eyes briefly. That's Elise, she said. Protective friend? Relentlessly. The door opened before Clara reached it. A woman in a navy coat stepped inside, carrying a phone and visible concern. She stopped immediately when she saw me. Then looked at Clara. You're still with him. Not angry, worried, which somehow felt more dangerous. Clara folded her arms. Good evening to you too, Elise. Elise looked between us. Then held up her phone. Do you understand people are sharing photos from the mixer already? Yes. And you brought him here. The phrasing hit harder than intended. Clara noticed. He walked here voluntarily, she said coolly. Elise exhaled sharply. Clara, I'm trying to protect you from becoming somebody's interesting phase. The room went quiet. I should have gotten defensive. Instead, I remembered something Clara said earlier. People become spectators instead of witnesses. So I listened. Elise continued, now looking directly at me. I'm sure you're charming, she said carefully. But I've watched men romanticize her maturity for 5 minutes and resent it 6 months later. Clara's jaw tightened. Elise, no. Somebody should say it. Her eyes stayed on me. Younger men love the idea of emotionally sophisticated women right up until they realize sophistication includes boundaries and memory and expectations. That line deserved honesty, so I gave it. That sounds like experience talking, said quietly. Elise blinked, probably expecting denial. It is, she replied. Then you're not wrong to worry. The room changed slightly after that. Not softer, more real. Clara watched me carefully. Elise lowered her phone. Most people get angry when challenged, she admitted. Most people confuse being questioned with being attacked. Clara's eyes flicked toward me. Something approving moved there before disappearing again. Elise sighed. I don't want her humiliated by another room full of people treating her age like a social experiment. Clara spoke before I could. Then stop doing it yourself. Silence. Elise looked stunned. Clara continued calmly. You walked in here assuming he must be performing something. You didn't ask me what I wanted. That landed. Hard. Elise's expression shifted from defensiveness into reluctant realization. That's fair, she admitted quietly. It usually is. The tension loosened by 1 degree. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The studio lights hummed overhead. Finally, Elise looked back at me. Why did you move beside her? Clara glanced toward me, but said nothing. I appreciated that. She wasn't answering for me. Because the room expected distance, I replied, and she didn't deserve it. Elise studied me carefully, then nodded once. That's either sincere or extremely practiced. I design hotel interiors, I said. If I were manipulative, I'd have better lines. Against her will, Elise laughed. Clara looked deeply annoyed by how amused she suddenly seemed. A few minutes later, Elise finally left after making Clara promise to text when she got home. At the door, she paused. If you hurt her because this makes you feel interesting, she told me evenly, I will become exhausting. That seems fair too. She nodded once and disappeared down the stairwell. The studio quieted again. Clara leaned briefly against a work table. I'm sorry about her. Don't be. You don't seem offended. No, just aware. Of what? I looked around the studio. At the restored paintings, the careful lighting, the years of patience visible in every surface. Then at her, that people have probably underestimated you so consistently they've started mistaking protection for love. Clara went very still. That was the moment the evening changed permanently. Not the chair, not the laughter, not even the almost kiss hanging invisibly between us. That sentence. Because I watched recognition move through her like something painful and relieving at the same time. You're observant in dangerous ways, she murmured. You keep saying dangerous like it's criticism, it's caution. She stepped closer then, slowly, carefully. The room suddenly felt smaller. I'm not a lesson for you, she said quietly. Or proof you're more evolved than those men at the mixer. I know. Do you? I think so. But if I don't, I'd rather learn honestly than pretend I already understand everything about you. That answer broke the final layer of distance between us. I saw it happen in her face. The exhaustion, the restraint, the careful emotional management she'd carried all evening. For one brief second it disappeared. Then Clara touched my wrist lightly and kissed me. Not dramatically. Not hungrily. Not like two strangers proving attraction. It felt deliberate. Earned. The kind of kiss adults give when they understand consequences and proceed anyway. When she stepped back, she looked almost irritated by her own reaction. I understood the feeling. This was not how I expected tonight to end, she admitted. You mean the emotionally hostile wine mixer didn't predict this outcome? A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Then headlights moved briefly across the studio windows. A car slowed outside. Someone inside lifted a phone toward the building. Clara saw it immediately, so did I. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she looked at me. There it is, she said quietly. What? The moment this stops being private. I waited. After several seconds, she reached for my hand. Not performatively, not fearfully, decisively. Then she turned slightly toward the window instead of away from it. Let them misunderstand, she whispered. The car eventually drove off. Rain continued falling, and Clara never let go of my hand. That was what stayed with me. Not the photo, not the possibility of gossip. The fact that holding my hand had clearly cost her something emotionally and she'd chosen it anyway. We sat together at one of the restoration tables, afterward drinking terrible vending machine coffee from paper cups. It should have ruined the atmosphere. Instead, it made everything feel more honest. We need clarity, Clara said eventually. That sounds ominous after a first kiss. I'm serious. I know. She tucked one leg beneath herself in the chair. I won't become somebody's experiment in emotional growth. Good. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Good? You deserve better than that. Something softened in her expression. Barely. And you? She asked. What about me? What exactly are you looking for? The question deserved precision, so I thought carefully before answering. I spent years inside a marriage where we slowly edited ourselves down into polite strangers, I said quietly. I don't want that anymore. She listened without interrupting. I don't need excitement, I continued. I need honesty that survives ordinary days. That sentence affected her more than the kiss had, I could tell. Maybe because loneliness changes shape as you get older. At 25, people fear rejection. At 45, they fear repetition. Clara looked down into her coffee. I used to think maturity guaranteed emotional intelligence, she admitted. It doesn't. It just produces better excuses. That's painfully accurate. I know. We talked until nearly 2 in the morning, about museums, architecture, the strange grief of becoming different people than your younger self expected. She told me she still played piano badly when stressed. I admitted I rearranged furniture whenever emotionally overwhelmed. That's deeply concerning behavior, she informed me. I create spatial harmony. You panic with throw pillows. Fair. By the time I left the studio, the city streets were nearly empty. Clara walked me downstairs. Rain had finally stopped. Cold air moved between the buildings. At the doorway, she looked at me carefully. Tomorrow might feel different, she warned. Why? because tonight felt unexpectedly important. That honesty hit harder than anything else. I looked at her. Then tomorrow can deal with it honestly, too. For a moment, she seemed unable to respond. Then she smiled. Small. You're going to complicate my life, she said softly. Apparently, I already started. The next morning, the second photo had already spread through the mixer's social pages. Not viral, just visible enough. Me and Clara standing inside the studio near the windows, her hand in mine. The comments underneath were exactly what you'd expect from emotionally underdeveloped adults with smartphones. Some supportive, some mocking, some weirdly fascinated. One guy wrote, "Bro unlocked premium therapy." Another, "She's probably more stable than women his age." That one annoyed me most because it still reduced her into comparison instead of personhood. I expected Clara to disappear for a while. Instead, at 11 that morning, her museum account posted a photo of the train station painting. Caption: "Stillness is not the same thing as waiting." No explanation, no apology, no reference to me, which somehow made it more powerful. At 2 in the afternoon, she texted, "Dinner Thursday," somewhere without audience participation. Then another message arrived. "And Adrian? Yes?" "Burn the charcoal shirt." It looked emotionally audited. I laughed out loud alone in my apartment, which felt unfamiliar enough to matter. Thursday became dinner. Dinner became Saturday afternoons at her studio while she restored damaged portraits and criticized my coffee standards. Saturday became bookstore walks, museum exhibits, long conversations in parked cars because neither of us wanted evenings to end naturally. Clara met my brother 3 weeks later. Within 20 minutes, she'd reduced him to helpless laughter after informing him his apartment lighting made him look emotionally subpoenaed. After she left, he stared at me across the kitchen. "Okay," he said carefully. "What exactly is happening to you? What do you mean? You look calm, it's unsettling." He wasn't wrong. I did feel different. Not euphoric, not reckless. Just strangely present. Like I'd spent years living one room away from myself, and somebody finally unlocked the correct door. 3 months later, the mixer photos were forgotten by almost everyone. But Clara wasn't. She had become part of my daily rhythm in small, intimate ways that mattered more than dramatic moments ever could. She sent me pictures of terrible museum gift shop merchandise. I sent her photos of catastrophic hotel lobby redesigns. She taught me how to notice restoration brushwork. I taught her why architects secretly hate decorative barn doors. We cooked together badly, argued gently about music, learned each other's silences. That part surprised me most, how different silence feels when it's safe. One rainy Sunday, I found Clara sitting cross-legged on the studio floor, staring at the train station painting. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "I think I'm grieving something ridiculous." What? The amount of time I spent trying to remain palatable instead of visible. That sentence nearly broke my heart. I sat beside her on the floor. After a while, she leaned lightly against my shoulder. "Do you know the strangest part?" she murmured. "What?" The older I became, the more people treated my confidence like a personality flaw. I looked at her. Their mistake. Maybe. Definitely. She smiled slightly without lifting her head. Dangerous certainty again. 6 months into the relationship, Clara invited me to a museum fundraiser. The irony nearly killed us both. Another room full of wealthy strangers, pretending emotional sophistication could be purchased with wine pairings. But this time was different, not because people didn't stare. Some did. Because neither of us adjusted ourselves around it anymore. At one point, an older donor approached Clara while I was getting drinks. I returned just in time to hear him say quietly, "You're brave dating younger." Brave. Like she was crossing enemy territory instead of having dinner with a man who cared about her. Clara smiled politely, then replied, "You're brave saying that out loud." I nearly dropped the champagne. Later that evening, standing outside beneath museum lights, I asked if comments like that still bothered her. She thought carefully before answering. "Less than they used to," she admitted. Why? She looked at me for a long moment, because eventually being loved accurately becomes louder than being judged incorrectly. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. A year after the mixer, Clara took me to the coast for my birthday. We rented a quiet cabin overlooking gray water and driftwood beaches. The second night, during a storm strong enough to rattle the windows, the power went out. We sat wrapped in blankets beside candlelight, listening to rain hammer the roof. Clara traced lazy circles against my wrist, then said suddenly, "I almost didn't attend that mixer." "Really?" I sat in my car for 20 minutes beforehand, convincing myself not to leave. "Why'd you stay?" She smiled faintly. "Spite, mostly. That's incredibly on brand for you." "I know." Then her expression shifted quieter. "Also loneliness," she admitted. That honesty felt sacred somehow. Not dramatic, just true. I kissed her forehead gently. "Me too," I said. The storm continued around us. Warm candlelight flickered across the cabin walls. And for the first time in years, loneliness felt like a place I'd survived, instead of a place I still lived. 18 months after the mixer, Clara finished restoring a heavily damaged 19th century portrait she'd worked on for nearly a year. The museum held a small unveiling ceremony. After the crowd dispersed, we stood alone in front of the painting. "You know what's strange?" she said quietly. "What? Most restoration isn't adding anything new. It's carefully uncovering what survived underneath." I looked at her, then at the portrait, then back at her again. "That sounds familiar somehow." Her eyes softened. "Yes," she said. 2 years after the mixer, I proposed in her studio. Not publicly, not dramatically, just us. Late evening. Rain against the windows again, because apparently Seattle insists on thematic consistency. She was cataloging restoration notes when I walked over and placed the ring box beside her coffee. Clara stared at it, then at me. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed genuinely speechless. "You once asked whether I would have chosen the seat beside you if nobody was watching," I said quietly. Her eyes filled immediately. "I still would," I continued. "Every room, every version of us, every time." She laughed softly through tears. That was almost unbearably romantic. "Almost? Don't become overconfident. Did you want a speech?" "No, I wanted honesty." "Good. Because honesty is what brought me to you in the first place." Clara looked at the ring once more, then back at me. "Yes," she whispered. The kiss that followed felt different from the first one. Less uncertain, less cautious, not because the world had become kinder, because we had stopped negotiating ourselves around it. Years later, when people asked how we met, Clara usually answered first. At a terrible singles mixer full of emotionally decorative people. And I'd add, best uncomfortable room I ever walked into. She'd always give me that same look afterward. The one that still made me feel chosen instead of merely accepted. The truth was, the mixer paired me with an older woman because they expected awkwardness. They expected tolerance. They expected social discomfort dressed up as open-mindedness. What they didn't expect was this, that the real test had nothing to do with age. It was whether two lonely people could recognize each other beneath the performance of modern adulthood. Whether somebody could sit beside a woman the room had already decided to underestimate and still see her clearly once the audience disappeared. And maybe that's the strange thing about connection. Sometimes it arrives disguised as the exact situation shallow people would laugh at first. Not because love enjoys irony, because honesty usually enters rooms through doors ego refuses to use. If you were in that mixer, what would you have done? And have you ever watched someone become more beautiful the moment you realized the world had been seeing them incorrectly the entire time? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.